That's the method. Let's now get into the results and begin looking at the results in terms of just giving you a broad brush perspective on the demography of the tank catchment overall and its sub-catchments. So for the tank catchment overall from the years 1996 out to 2013, this is what population growth has looked like in actual count numbers, just to give you some sense of what that looks like. When you drop down to sub-catchment scale, it's a little bit different. So this is the shift in scale that I was talking about before. So in the slides I'm going to present to you today, what I've done is I've put these sets of graphs for the sub-catchments all onto one slide, and they're in the same order, just so you know they're always in the same place. This is the Karamu sub-catchment, the Ahuriri, the Ngaruroro sub-catchment here, and the Tutaikuri sub-catchment over here. Now you noticed in terms of population projections across these sub-catchments, that between 1996 and 2013, for all of the catchments, we've got growth. However, when you take the past averaged area unit growth rates and you project those out into the future for the Ahuriri catchment and for the Tutaikuri, what that implies is a flattening or levelling off of the population into the future. Now, that's being caused by this here. A number of the sub-catchment area unit populations are experiencing long-term negative growth rates at the moment. So what I've done in these graphs here is just to take each of these area unit subpopulations and then to run a projection on those based on their averaged growth rate, so you can see what's happening there. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is just a rough back of the envelope kind of approach to give you a sense of how this plays out long term. To really get a handle on this, we'd have to set up a proper dynamic model that has all those four characteristics of demographic behaviour, immigration, emigration, and of course also the birth rates and death rates as well. Now, why is population stagnation a problem? Well, first of all, because in this case it's been driven by immigration, in other words, a net loss from the subpopulations, which means a loss of economic, social and cultural capital from those area units. This has implications for the labour market long term and leaves us with this interesting question as to why there is a net outflow at the moment. Just to drill inside that a little bit more, let's have a look now at population residency times. So this graph here is for the Karamu catchment, and this just shows you the format of the next four graphs that I'm going to show you. So what we've got here are actual population counts on this axis. This grouping here is for those residents who stayed within the catchment at the time of the census less than 1 year. 1 to 4 years, 5 to 9 years, 10 to 24 years, and 15 to 29 years there, and then 30 years or more here at the end. Now, you'll notice that I've put a circle around that and just drawn attention to it. Those who are staying 30 years or more in the catchment are providing a really important cultural and social contribution to the catchment. They are what I refer to as the cultural memory of the catchment. In other words, they're the families and the members of the community that have been there a long time, that remember all of the past events and the contexts and who's and what's and how's. So that's a really, really important part of the local community, and you'll notice that's actually now a very, very small part of that total population. What we have here is a much larger part of the population that is actually turning over on a reasonably short time frame. So what I've done in these graphs here is run that same analysis for all of the sub-catchments. So you can see that across the Karamu, Ahuriri, Ngaruroro and Tutaikuri, the structure of those graphs from 1996, 2001, 2006, 2013, census data are all basically the same. Now in this last graph, what I've done is for each of the catchments, sub-catchments, the Karamu, the Ahuriri, the Ngaruroro and the Tutaikuri, I've taken those different residency times from I stay less than 1 year right up until I've stayed up to 9 years, and I've grouped all of that data together so that you've got some sense of how many people stay up to 9 years in those sub-catchments. And what you can see here for the Karamu, that is 66%. This one drops down here to about 58%. So roughly 60 to 70% of the population is turning over in those catchments within 1 to 9 years. So the key issue here, the creation and maintenance of cultural memory is now at risk. within those catchments. And that has some, I think, some really interesting implications in terms of our democratic processes. Because obviously, while that cultural memory is numerically smallest in number, it actually has a very, very important influence in terms of ongoing decision making within the catchment that maintains that cultural identity and well-being. We have approximately 60 to 70% of population turnover within 0 to 9 years, which means that in terms of the implementation of the tank plan, there's going to be need for ongoing education on local environmental context, policies and rules. There's an upward need for this is placing upward pressure on the housing market, and it implies that there are 10 yearly shifts in subcatchment population age structure as well, and I'm going to come back to that point later. So let's now look at age structure. So for all 4 subcatchment populations, what I've done is depicted age structure here, and they're just different colours. So blue is the Karamu, orange is the Ahuriri, the Narururu is a bit hard to see there. I think that's a grey, and the Tutaikuri is the yellow. So the 2 rural populations down here, they're the numerically smaller. The 2 larger ones here are the urban populations, the Karamu and the Ahuriri. So this shows you the general structure of the population. What I've done is I've grouped both male and female sides of the population together. And then on top of the age structure, these numbers here represent the approximate year of birth for that particular age cohort. So for example, those groups between 90 and 94, that 4-year age cohort were born roughly in 1928, come back 10 years, 1938, 1948, etc., just so that you can see when that stage of the population was actually born. And from that analysis, what you can see is that this branch of the population here is the last part, if you like, of the baby boomer population moving through. In through here, we get into the 1980s, the early 1990s, the economic reforms in New Zealand when there was a lot of downward pressure on our economic activity and high inflation. So the population went into sub-replacement mode there. When we get to the bottom of the population here, what this is showing us is that there's a growing base to the population, which is really good. In the next slide, what I've done is I've enlarged the 2 rural populations. So this is the Narururu and the Tutaikuri. Very similar age structure with a couple of differences. We've got the ageing population here, the sub-replacement loop here in the bottom, but also some decline here, sub-replacement decline here in the base of the actual population age structure. So key issues and implications of age structure. You have an ageing population that spans the next 50 years. Okay, it's going to take 50 years for that baby boomer stage of the population to finally move through the population. And that will be followed by a sub-replacement population for approximately 30 years after that. You have an expanding urban populations in both of the Ahuriri and Karamu, but sub-replacement rural populations in the Narururu and Tutaikuri. In other words, the base of it is not growing at the moment. Implications, obviously infrastructure and services for an ageing population. This is the planning question. Do we build early childcare centres, or should we be planning for bowling greens and elderly care facilities? There's obviously going to be a need for the labour market to compensate for these shifts in the population age structure over the next 80 years. And because of high population turnover, and we're talking about 50 to 60% of the population within up to 9 years, age structure is migration dependent. And that means that it's going to be difficult to predict and plan for age structure because it will be constantly adjusting in response to that throughput of population.